Hello everyone, welcome to the video. For the last month, a lot has been made about USAID, which programs and initiatives have been wasteful, and a lot of accusations of fraud and abuse have been hurled at the agency, making it close its doors and trying to stop payments for work already done. There's a lot of confusion of what it does, what the purpose of it is, and the role that foreign aid has on the greater U.S. diplomatic strategy. So let's take a look at what this agency does, what its purpose is, and whether it's the premise or the implementation that needs to be reconsidered. This is Dissecting Politics, so let's open this up. So what is USAID and its mission? USAID tries to promote and demonstrate democratic values abroad, advance a free, peaceful, and prosperous world by focusing on international development and disaster assistance to save lives, reduce poverty, strengthen democratic governance, and help people emerge from humanitarian crises and beyond assistance. The purpose is to help people struggling in regions around the world become prosperous so that they can generate their own wealth rather than being reliant on aid. All of this is pulled straight from the website. The link will be in the description. So then looking at what USAID did in 2023, it spent $71.9 billion in foreign aid. Of that $71.9 billion, 27% is in economic development, 21.7% is in humanitarian assistance, 22.3% is in health. Most of that is combating HIV and AIDS, but there's also some other health initiatives in there too. USAID also does work in peace and security, and a small amount of it goes into program support, democracy and human rights, education, social services, and then some even in some environmental programs. So then the next question is, where does the USA funding mostly go? Obviously the big contributor right now is going to be the Ukraine because of the war, but the next highest is Israel, followed by a bunch of countries in Africa, and Afghanistan is there also. USAID doesn't contribute all its money to specific causes within certain countries, but probably about a third of it does. So while a lot of money did go to Ukraine, there are political reasons for that, and it's probably very likely that if Russia never invaded Ukraine, that this money would have gone allocated to something else rather than having fewer funding dollars. So whether this is a good thing or bad thing, we will talk about it a little later in the video. So now that we have the budget out of the way, the next question is, what is USAID trying to accomplish? Like I said before, the purpose is to provide disaster relief, economic growth, healthcare, promoting democracy, and battling food securities. So we know what value it provides to the people that it helps, but the bigger question is, what value does it bring to the United States? I'm going to go back into history a little bit, but a term dating back to the Cold War called soft power basically is the idea that these types of foreign aid programs opens up diplomatic and economic alliances with developing countries around the world. This means that the governments and their citizens are going to have a greater positivity towards democracy, which in the end is a good thing for the United States and the world, both economically and politically. More wealth is generated for more people when there's more stability, let alone all of the political and humanitarian benefits. So a lot of this was based around the idea of pushing against the forces of communism in the 80s. Because these countries eventually will have greater self-sufficiency and stronger diplomatic ties to the countries that provide aid, more wealth can be generated both for the donor countries and the recipients of foreign aid. Sometimes, this money can be loaned, other times it can be gifted. We see this talked about a lot with Ukraine, and the specifics I could go over in another video if there's interest. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd be interested in. But the really big part is that the money spent over there goes a lot further because of the strength of the US dollar. So in addition to the political favor it creates, from a strict humanitarian consideration, it's a lot cheaper to build a school or a hospital in a developing country than it is here in the United States. So in the end, for me, that's the biggest consideration of the power that foreign aid can have. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is another question, but you can't argue with the fact that money goes a lot further in those developing countries. Next, let's compare what the U.S. contributes to foreign aid versus other countries. Now, the United States has a much higher GDP than some of these countries do, so on a percentage scale, it may not nearly be as high. But to me, that doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter how much you're doing versus how much you could, because there are so many differences in cost to infrastructure, defense spending, cost of healthcare. Not being in the EU, it's really just not comparable. So yes, the US does contribute more money, but it's also a lower percentage of its GDP. So of course the United States does contribute significantly more, but the US can afford to. Now the question comes, is this sustainable? Is this what the United States wants to do, or should they work with their European and Asian allies to increase over time their foreign spending so that it's more balanced? Really, the question comes down to what kind of role does the United States want to have in the world? Does it want to be a key player in the different continents around the world with hopes that they can use that leverage for even greater economic power? Or does it want to focus on developing its own infrastructure and economies that has its own unique set of benefits? Focusing internally may not allow for as good economic development, but this, of course, could benefit the American people more than developing countries' economies around the world. From a strict fiscal perspective, this is a difficult question to consider. It's not as simple to say do it because the world benefits and the U.S. can make some money on it. There are many things in play, and you can't do everything. You have to pick what you can and can't do, because also you have to consider there's going to be repercussions. If you isolate too much, you can be left behind what the other world powers are doing and slowly drift out of being a player in global influence. Now, you may say that's not a problem, but it's really something that you have to consider. Dropping out of being a big player on the world stage isn't something that you can just magically, regain. So once you lose it, it's very difficult to impossible to recapture. And really, this probably deserves its own kind of video, but I'll touch on it here. But China has a Belt and Road Initiative, which is a perfect example of ways in which America could be left behind if it pulls back too much. This initiative started in 2013 and is a purposeful attempt in which China has been investing in global infrastructure projects around the globe. It's in over 150 countries, and is part of the reason why they have had a greater resurgence in being politically and economically viable in the world stage in the last decade. The Chinese government is playing the long game with some of these and has been seeing greater influence by taking connections in countries rich in metals, especially rare earths. When you think about the importance of technologies moving forward, especially with AI and some other advances, being able to have greater control over these minerals and resources is just going to be a lot more important. It could affect the role that the U.S. plays internationally if less development across the world is being done. Some things could be wasteful, programs or initiatives, but that does not mean that they are wasteful. Greater oversight and breaking up working groups so that way there's less groupthink in terms of what needs to happen, so there's a diversity of opinions in making these decisions with taxpayer dollars, is really what needs to happen. So as we've seen, the U.S. is giving a lot more than other countries. The question is whether we should be moving away from giving as much across the globe and start to work towards being more balanced with other countries across the world in terms of how much is being contributed. Now, of course, we need to make sure that we're not affecting our ability to be a player in international politics, but it's something definitely to be considered, as eventually there will need to be a change in terms of how we manage our budget. So the goal shouldn't be to just cut it out entirely, as it's going to hurt our relationships with both allies and developing countries, but it's to work with allies to get a greater balance, because it's not sustainable for the USA to continue to bankroll a lot of these programs. So specifically, the downfall from scaling it back too far is that the US can't afford to let China and Russia fill the gap and be able to benefit from those development projects, which is going to let the US fall further behind both economically and diplomatically. If the US does, they will get frozen out of the new waves of technologies and innovations that are going to come by in the next couple decades and become a second-tier global power, which we've seen happen over and over again in history. But that doesn't mean that the United States can bankrupt itself from foreign aid either. America doesn't have the economic strength it had in the 90s, so it isn't sustainable, and it's something that's going to have to be done. There will definitely need to be changes. America can't continue to bankroll the foreign aid for the rest of the world. Cutting back entirely isn't the right move, but a gradual transition so that way America can begin to pay down some of its debts is necessary. The U.S. needs to work with its allies to step up to the plate, not for concessions, but because it is a necessity. The U.S. needs to look at its role in certain places and fight against certain lobbyist groups, such as Israel and other nation-based lobbyist groups, to limit aid to countries where soft power doesn't help as much or doesn't go as far. In the 21st century, the USA needs to be a little more strategic in how it spends its money or how they get into so much debt, so it's not possible to recover. While soft power is very effective, making certain alliances with certain countries has diplomatic ramifications with other parts of the world, and those need to be taken into consideration so you don't alienate people who have resources that America needs to be prosperous in the 21st and 22nd century. So that's a deeper look into USAID and what its purpose is and what the US needs to do to fix the foreign aid problem it has gotten itself into. Thank you for staying to the end. Make sure to like and subscribe to not miss further videos looking at these things in greater detail. This once again has been Dissecting Politics. We will see you next time.